So out of all of the quests in Genshin, you gotta admit the yearly Dainsleif quest has always been one of the most highly anticipated one, and it's also the one that's talked about the most. There's just always so much going on and memorable lore bombs left and right. It's really a no-brainer that these quests are a fan favorite. As an avid lore enjoyer, I've always found them more enjoyable than the average quest, and I've always wanted to talk about them, and my fingers slipped 10,000 times and wrote this entire essay about why I find these quests so entertaining. So basically, it's just another excuse for me to talk about who I think is one of the most interesting characters in the game, and also my favorite part of the lore, Khaenri'ah. I'm gonna break down each of the Dainsleif quests one by one and just talk about them, specifically what I liked about them personally and what I think they could have done better, and how the writing of these quests is so different from all of the other Archon quests. I believe Genshin has 3 types of stories. The first one is the featured character stories. This would include the Archon quest that focuses on the Archons of the 7 nations, and the story quests of different 5-star characters, and also the event quests that also focuses on a set of characters. This type of story is perfect for players who enjoy a large cast. There doesn't have to be a lot going on plot-wise. Like for example, the annual Lantern Rite is an event that usually features a lot of characters with one central featured character being the focus, but all in all, the story is usually pretty lighthearted. The second type of story that Genshin has is the world-building quests. Now, most of these happen in, well, world quests, like the Sakura Cleansing Quest, the Aranara, the Jet Quest, and so on. Unfortunately, these quests aren't voiced, so a lot of players tend to fast forward through them because it can get boring. But the one we are talking about today is the third kind. It's the quest that focuses on moving the main plot forward. It's the quest that focuses solely on the traveler and the point of origin of the plot, that being Khaenri'ah. These quests only have one character that's currently playable, and that's the traveler. It will have 2 or 3 important NPCs, and that usually includes Dainsleif. There's no cast, no random characters being shoehorned. It's all about the main story and how everything else that's happening in the game, including character and world building lore, are tied together. These are of course the Dainsleif quests. As usual, all of the things I will talk about are mostly personal opinions, so feel free to correct me if I get some things wrong or if you disagree. So let's start at the very beginning. The first time the traveler came face to face with Dainsleif. We actually first met Dainsleif in a world quest, the Bowkeeper one, but it was pretty short and not much happens. It really just introduced Dainsleif as an enigmatic character and how he might be related to the Abyss Twin and the Abyss Order. Dainsleif does ask the traveler 3 important questions. His questions are related to the recent events that took place in Mondstadt and Liyue. It's also the first time that we meet a character who knew about the Archons' true identities. Dainsleif also explains that he will only take commissions related to the Abyss Order, and he also makes it known that he is very familiar with the Traveler's twin. It's even hinted here that they had traveled together. This is obviously a very special world quest though, given how the entire thing is voice acted and is the prerequisite for the Archon quests. It does its job as a short prologue, it raises enough questions, it introduces Dainsleif as an intriguing character, it makes it pretty clear while we deal with the Fatui in the Archon quest, we will be dealing with the Abyss Order in the Dainsleif quests, at least for now. Now for those that are a bit hazy on what even happened and we will be reunited, after meeting Dainsleif in the aforementioned world quest, the traveler goes to the Adventurers Guild and they bump into Ganyu, and they learn that the treasure hoarders are planning a heist on the Abyss Order, and she's there to post a commission about it because the Chising is too busy to take care of it right now. And who better to take care of a bunch of treasure hoarders than the traveler? The traveler and Paimon started their investigation and found themselves in the ruins where they found a very creepy upside down statue and the deceased Grand Thief kneeling in front of it, which back in patch 1.4 is probably the creepiest thing Genshin has ever done at that point. The dead body, the defiled upside down statue of Barbados, the tone is just very different from the rest of the game up until this point, which is something that I actually like. The creepy, unsettling vibe actually works considering the things related to Khaenri'ah that will be revealed later on, but yeah, more on that later. The traveler bumped into an Abyss Herald and then they got into a fight until the Herald teleports away. And right outside of the ruins, they also bumped into Dainsleif, who apparently also had no idea why there was an inverted statue of the 7 in the ruins. But nonetheless, he thought it was a good opportunity to catch up with the Abyss Order since they were so close. During the traveler's time together with Dainsleif, he starts mentioning Khaenri'ah and revealing what really happened to the nation. This is also a very interesting moment to me because I think it's the first time that the traveler actually had information that's concealed from us, the players. Up until this point, the players did not know that the traveler was in Khaenri'ah 500 years ago, nor about the research that they've done about it, and how the sibling woke up first. This is all very new information. I personally feel like up until this point, the traveler has acted as a surrogate or a self-insert to the players in the world of Teyvat. So this is the first time in a quest where they actually feel like they're a standalone character. I know they have voice lines and stuff, but I believe this is the first time that they have shown some sort of autonomy in an Archon quest. Dain also points out that the Abyss Order is searching for something related to the Ruin Guards. He also casually drops the lore behind them. Apparently, they were called field tillers, and they are the invention of the people of Khaenri'ah, which he also mentions to be a godless nation. But it's not because their god died like how Liyue now is technically a godless nation, but Khaenri'ah never had a god to begin with. And it's also heavily hinted that Khaenri'ah is a nation that is technologically advanced and may not be that peaceful of a nation to begin with, considering that Dainsleif mentions that the field tillers are basically war machines invented by Khaenri'ah, and after it fell, the field tillers just kind of wandered off aimlessly in Teyvat. After defeating a couple of more abyss mages, the traveler and Dainsleif found a talisman that Dainsleif was able to translate. Basically, the Abyss Order's plan is to attach Osial's limbs to the defiled statue that we found earlier and use the eye of the first field tiller or ruin guard to basically make a mechanized god? Why? I have no idea. To this day, I still find the plan to make a mechanized god from Osial kinda convoluted and a bit ridiculous, and I don't see how it can help the Abyss Order in achieving their goal. Now that we know it's a war against destiny, maybe a mechanized god is strong enough to go against Celestia. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of silly. The next course of action for the Traveler and Dainsleif is of course to find the eye of the first field tiller before the Abyss Order does. Which, after some help from Barbara and Rosaria and bumping into the same Abyss Herald that was now attacking Boreas, they managed to pinpoint the location of the field tiller to be the sole ruin guard in Storm Terror's lair that just so happens to be sitting and facing Celestia. They go to retrieve the eye, and Dainsleif suggests that they go back to the ruins and destroy the defiled statue once and for all. And of course, things didn't go as planned. They were attacked by the Abyss Order, and just as they were about to win, they were of course confronted by the Abyss Twin. This is a monumental moment for Genshin's story. This is the first time that the Traveler has come face to face with the Abyss Twin, and this is also the first time that the Traveler is addressed by their real name, either Lumine or Aether, depending on who you pick at the start of the game. Even to this day, the Abyss sibling is also still the only one who calls the Traveler by that name. The sibling then reveals the true identity of Dainsleif. He was the Twilight Sword, a royal guard of Khaenri'ah who, in their words, failed to protect his own people and is now cursed with immortality. He is also now forced to watch his own people turn into monsters of the abyss. The Traveler then tries to convince their sibling to go back home, but they refuse, saying something about how they need to complete the Abyss Order's goals and something about how there's a war with destiny, and most importantly, that the Traveler will only learn the truth once they reach the end of their journey in Teyvat. And then they leave, and Dainsleif chases after them, which at the time, I think it was a pretty good cliffhanger to a very lore-dense quest. It was the first time that anything related to Khaenri'ah has been mentioned so directly, and the first time we've seen the Abyss Twin since they disappeared at the start of the game. And considering how finding the Traveler's sibling is the main plot of the game, this was a pretty big deal. It also expands on who Dainsleif is, like his origins and how he's tied to Khaenri'ah, and it's also the first mention of the curse that plagues the citizens of Khaenri'ah. It also establishes the very important fact that some of the monsters that the Traveler had been fighting used to be human beings. It just adds a layer of darkness to the story, especially with the creepy symbolism everywhere. I mean, I'm not gonna run for the hills at the sight of the Grand Thief's corpse kneeling in front of an upside-down statue of Barbados, but it was definitely unsettling and creepy, and not what I expected from a game that used to be kinda comfy for me. The tone of We Will Be Reunited is just so different from the Archon quest that came before, so I think it does its job pretty well in setting the tone for the rest of the Khaenri'ah plotline. It's not until 1 year later that we're reunited with Dainsleif. We meet him again in Requiem of Echoing Depths, which takes place in the Chasm. This quest is a personal favorite of mine because there's just so much that's revealed, and I think because it takes place in the Chasm, it makes what happens a lot more depressing. So if you don't remember what happens in this quest, the Traveler is made aware of some unusual hilichurl activities down in the Chasm through a commission. Suspecting that the Abyss Order might be involved, the Traveler went down to the Chasm to investigate. And down in the Chasm, they discovered an inverted city, which coincidentally is similar to the upside-down defiled statue that the the traveler found in the ruins back in We Will Be Reunited. And Dainsleif just so happens to appear through a portal right there. This prompts the traveler to ask Dainsleif what the was going on with him and Khaenri'ah and the Abyss Order. Dainsleif then finally explained that he was the captain of the Khaenri'ah Royal Guard, otherwise known as the Twilight Sword. It's then soon revealed that the Hilichurls came to the chasm to basically live out their last days. Because for some reason, the area seems to give a sense of relief for those cursed during the cataclysm. And then the traveler and Dainsleif were attacked by two Black Serpent Knights, who are also Dainsleif's former subordinates. And one knight actually refuses to attack Dainsleif and the traveler. Now, this is obviously Halfdan, an elite royal guard who was tasked by Dainsleif during the day of the disaster to tell all of the other Black Serpent Knights to protect the people of Khaenri'ah at all costs. And for some reason, despite the curse eroding their minds, the royal guards have never stopped in trying to fulfill their last orders. And Halfdan was especially peculiar because he seemed to recognize Dainsleif. And it just so happens that they are in an ancient city that's apparently equipped with an upside-down pool that has water that can cleanse some of the curse's effects. They start suspecting that the Abyss Order was trying to use the properties of the special water there to cleanse the curse or get rid of it. But then Dainsleif tells the traveler that it was pretty much a pointless plan and all of that will only bring more harm to the already suffering Hilichurls. Dainsleif claims that he is someone that's fully conscious but is also suffering from the curse, so no one understands the curse better than him. Dainsleif also claims that trying to remove the curse in such a forceful manner will feel like someone is burning off their skin. It's pretty much impossible, and if what the Abyss Order is doing is trying to use that water from the fountain to erase the curse, then they are gambling with the possibility of inflicting even more pain onto them. After looking at some very tragic facts about the Hilichurls and their last days of suffering, the traveler found a flower, the Intefat flower, which is also the national flower of Khaenri'ah, and it's also the same one on Lumine's hair. And when the traveler touched it, they had a vision of their twin planning on using the pool of water and the contraption there to cleanse the curse and revive the homeland. And after hearing this, the traveler decides that they will help Dainsleif in stopping the Abyss Order's plan, which is a very big and interesting moment to me. This is a moment where the traveler felt the need to defy the Abyss twin. They're not out here trying to find them or even understand them. All they know is that they can't let their twin bring more suffering for a small chance of redemption. This is the first time that we see the actions of the Abyss twin clashing directly with the traveler's morals. The traveler believes that no one has the right to make choices on behalf of another living being, regardless of their consciousness. It's even more unacceptable to them if those people had already made their choice. In this case, the Hilichurls had already chosen their end. In the attempt of stopping the Abyss Order, Halfdan, still in the form of a Black Serpent Knight, sacrificed himself in a very heroic and emotional moment to temporarily stop the device, giving the traveler just enough time to defeat the Abyss Lector and destroy the mechanisms powering the device. Afterwards, Halfdan's spirit or soul made an appearance and briefly said his last words to Dainsleif before passing on for good. And can I just say I freaking love this dialogue between Halfdan and Dainsleif. I really liked that to Halfdan, Dainsleif's presence alone was enough to reassure him that Khaenri'ah did not fall. Dainsleif was enough to give him hope. And I really liked that Dainsleif lied and said that Khaenri'ah has not fallen. And I think Dainsleif's answer is quite interesting because it can be motivated by two things. One is obviously an act of kindness towards Halfdan so that his spirit or soul can pass on in peace. And second, it's almost like he's reassuring himself that because Khaenri'ah did not fall, therefore there's no need to revive the homeland. All in all, A+ character dialogue, A+ emotional moment. I love it. I love this cutscene. Dainsleif then leaves to tend to his wound because man was beat up pretty bad at the end, and also to investigate the Abyss Order's Loom of Fate project, and he parts way with the traveler. Now obviously a lot happened in this quest, so much lore about Khaenri'ah, the royal guards, Dainsleif, and a lot about the nature of the curse. Like while the majority of the people have lost their intelligence, there are some who have retained their consciousness fully like Dainsleif, while some like the Black Serpent Knights can retain bits and pieces, which is why they still try to fulfill their last order up until the very end. I think this is also the quest that we spent the most time with Dainsleif as a character, because in the next one, he's barely in it. But that doesn't mean it's a bad quest though, because Caribert is a very good quest. Now the next act takes place in Sumeru, and it is a doozy. Like I swear swear with every one of these quests, the lore bombs just get bigger and bigger. If from the previous quest we got confirmation to things that were probably already theorized, this time we got to see firsthand on the origins of something that I thought we wouldn't get to see, at least not so soon. This time, we got to learn about the origins of the Abyss Order. This quest started out with the Traveler and Paimon running into this guy who hands them a letter from Khaenri'ah, which also is about damn time that he's involved in a quest about Khaenri'ah, considering that's where he's from. He's one of the only living descendants of Khaenri'ah that we know of. He's also what they call the last hope of Khaenri'ah, so he's pretty important. The Traveler meets Khaenri'ah at the tavern in Port Ormos, and he's apparently in Sumeru to do some research on the alcohol industry there or something. Khaenri'ah then admits that he doesn't like going to Sumeru because it brings a lot of weird and bad memories for him. Apparently, Khaenri'ah as a child had tried to sneak away to Sumeru to learn about his own roots after learning that Khaenri'ah was geographically located somewhere near Sumeru, but he was then caught being a stowaway and was sent back to Mondstadt. Khaenri'ah also doesn't know much about Khaenri'ah. He only knows things from what he's read in books, and he has never been attached with the nation itself because he spent most of his life in Mondstadt. He makes a point that his last name, Alberich, is the only thing that ties him to Khaenri'ah. And out of nowhere, our man of the hour arrives. Dainsleif directly asks Khaenri'ah about his last name and what he knew about it, and Dainsleif casually drops a lore bomb like he always does. It's revealed that Khaenri'ah's ancestors are actually the founders of the Abyss Order, which is information that even Khaenri'ah himself is privy to, so it came as a huge shock for everyone at that table. Khaenri'ah then makes an observation and points out that Dainsleif is a pure-blooded Khaenri'ah due to his uniquely shaped pupils. Dainsleif then hopes that even with this information about his ancestry, Khaenri'ah will continue to live his life and leave his roots in the past. Dainsleif and Khaenri'ah obviously have a very strange dynamic and relationship. It's pretty obvious that Dainsleif doesn't trust Khaenri'ah. Not that Khaenri'ah is a trustworthy person to begin with, but in this case, he's also a descendant of the founder of the Abyss Order, which is why Dainsleif is just a bit more cautious around him. And then Khaenri'ah tries to reassure the Traveler and Dainsleif that he's not really the type to be bound to something like ancestry, and that he's still more than happy to hunt down the Abyss Order. Dainsleif is in Sumeru because he remembered something about the Loom of Fate operation, which he has been investigating. Sumeru is apparently the location where the Abyss Twin mentioned that operation when they were traveling together. The Traveler and Dainsleif arrive at this small yet familiar field that's pretty much been abandoned for years. They went inside the hut located near the field, and the Traveler found a broken mirror inside a box. And not long after, Dainsleif hears noises from outside, and it turns out this place attracts a lot of monsters, so there might be a ley line anomaly in the area. Dainsleif goes to investigate alone while the Traveler waits at the house. After reminiscing about their sibling with Paimon for a little bit, the Traveler goes to sleep. Now this is where things got a little weird because when the Traveler wakes up, Dainsleif is suddenly back, but Paimon is gone. Dainsleif then goes back into the forest, which is strange because he just went there the night before. And soon after, they find an unknown man yelling at them. The man is pretty suspicious and very obviously from Khaenri'ah. And when the Traveler follows him inside the hut, we find a wounded hilichurl with a scarf who this man seems to be very protective of. Then things really took a turn when the suspicious man started talking about how he, the hilichurl, was too young to suffer such a fate. The man then introduces himself as Ida, and it's pretty fucking clear that he isn't the biggest fan of gods, and he's also cursed with immortality. And he went on a rant about a gift that apparently destroyed Khaenri'ah. He's of course referring to the curse, and the big question now is why are some of the people of Khaenri'ah turned into hilichurls and some aren't? Ida then explains that there was only one bloodline that founded Khaenri'ah, and those people took in all of the other humans that didn't believe in the seven or gods. The descendants of that bloodline, or the pure-blooded Khaenri'ahs, were deemed to be the greater sinners and were cursed with immortality, while the rest were given the curse of the wilderness and transformed into hilichurls. The hilichurl with the scarf is then introduced as Caribert, who turns out to be Ida's illegitimate son that he had with a woman from Mondstadt while he was unsatisfied with his life as a noble in Khaenri'ah. The Traveler then finds Ida making medicine for Caribert, a medicine that he hopes will cure him of the curse, which is something that the Traveler knows is pretty much impossible. But Ida does hope it will at least awaken Caribert's mind and help him regain his consciousness. However, it has one very peculiar step. In order to make this medicine, it needs the power of the seven, which of course doesn't sit well with Ida at all. But at this point, he stopped caring as he's pretty much out of options. What's worse is that he actually needs to go to the statue of the seven and get the blessing of the god of wisdom in order for this medicine to even work, or so it says. With the medicine fully prepared, Ida and the traveler gave it to Caribert, and sadly it had no effect on him. This made Ida very angry. And can I just say, Ida at this point in the quest is already a very fascinating character. He's clearly the shell of a broken man. He's lost everything, his homeland, his family, and everything he's ever known to the gods. But in order to save his son, the son that has been treated so unfairly by the world, he's willing to bow down and beg the gods for their help. That is to no avail, of course. It's heart-wrenching, and even if he's just introduced 15 minutes ago, it's very hard to not sympathize with him and what he's going through, especially when there are dialogues like this, showing how cruel the curse truly is. Ida is basically forced to sit there and watch the one thing he has left suffer. He's forced to erode both in mind and body, and in his own words, he would have given the gods everything if it meant he could save his son, but they won't even let him die. The traveler tried to console him, saying that maybe the dose of the medicine might not be enough and they should try to make more. But while they were trying to make more of the medicine, they noticed Caribert leaving. And also while trying to make the second dose, Ida keeps saying he needs to make fertilizer, and if the eerie red color of the mushroom isn't a dead giveaway that he's using dead bodies as fertilizer, then his shady behavior pretty much confirms it. They followed the hilichurl, and it turns out it's not Caribert because he didn't have his scarf, the scarf that his birth mother gave him. The hilichurl's behavior is unusual enough that it made Ida and the traveler curious and decided to follow it to this unknown and ominous sanctuary where they discovered that the hilichurls are praying to something. After investigating further, they're both greeted by a strange being, and the traveler recognized the being as something from the abyss, but it's not the usual abyss monsters that they've come across. After the traveler defeats it, Ida reacts to the being a bit weirdly, to say the least. Like, it's actually concerning how he admires the strange power and how the traveler managed to defeat it. Definitely worrying. When they reach the end of the sanctuary, they find a strange object hanging in midair that's again very similar to the upside down statue from We Will Be Reunited. And as the traveler starts to feel that there's something very wrong and they ask to leave, Ida suddenly started to bow down to the mysterious voice that apparently calls itself a sinner and not a god. As the voice leaves, Ida regains consciousness, acting a bit strange too. After returning to the hut, they gave the second dose of medicine to Caribert, and he begins to regain consciousness. And his reaction when he realizes his fate was, to say it was devastating would be an understatement. Caribert was horrified, and Ida tried to console him by telling Caribert that they were in a fairy tale world where there's no more Khaenri'ah and no more cataclysm, but he has to live as a monster in this world. Ida also tells Caribert that he should never ever take off his mask. Ida, for whatever reason, believed the voice in the very not suspicious and ominous cave actually saved Caribert, so he wanted to return there to pray to it, fully disregarding the traveler's warning about how the voice isn't the voice of God but the voice of a sinner. Ida acting like he just found the one true God is completely understandable though. The man was never stable to begin with, and now somehow after encountering the sinner, a miracle happened right before his eyes. So for him to immediately fall off the deep end and start worshipping the sinner is pretty expected. Worried for his safety, the traveler goes back to the sanctuary to make sure he doesn't die or something. But when they got there, the strange thing hanging in midair was gone, and there weren't any hilichurls there either. And when they decided to go back to the house, Caribert was missing and pieces of a broken mirror was on the floor. Obviously, this implies that Caribert ran off after taking off his mask. The traveler and Ida frantically went out to look for him. They eventually found Caribert, and there he was, engulfed by the power of the abyss as he took off his mask and the traveler passed out. Once they wake up, Ida reveals his true identity, that being Clothar Alberic. Yes, Alberic as in Khaenri'ah Alberic. As it turns out, he is Khaenri'ah's ancestor, and he starts talking about how Caribert should be able to weave his own destiny, and how he shall now become the Loom of Fate, which is a term that we will be hearing more and more as we get more of these Dainsleif quests. And if that that's not enough of a lore bomb, Clothar then turns to the traveler and starts calling them Prince or Princess of Khaenri'ah, depending on who you're playing as. This makes it very obvious to the players that everything we just witnessed was basically the memory of the Abyss twin, so we were actually in the point of view of the traveler's sibling. This freaks the traveler out enough to pick up the mirror and see themselves as their twin, and before losing consciousness again, they hear how Clothar was making declarations of how he was gonna make use of the power of the Abyss to fight the gods. When the traveler woke up, they woke up to Paimon and Dainsleif. Dainsleif then explains that the Abyss messed up the ley lines near that area and he'd gone and fixed it, but that pretty much explains the traveler's dream. They then started digging the soil near the area and they found the remains of a man, which is implied to be Clothar, who disappeared 100 years after he founded the Abyss Order, which means he somehow found a way to get rid of the curse of immortality. This comes as a very big shock to Dainsleif. They also found a woman in the soil that was used to grow the mushrooms used in the medicine for caribert, which heavily implies that Mama was part of the fertilizer, which I guess also explained why Clothar got so defensive when the traveler or Abyss twin asked them about the mother. He said they were separated, but it turns out she was buried right outside. Dainsleif then said they needed to go their separate ways again for now and said some really cryptic things like he may have seen the traveler, he of course referring to the sinner the traveler saw in their vision. Dainsleif has suspicions on who the sinner is, but he needs to confirm. And that concludes Caribert, which in my opinion is a very intense quest with very significant lore bombs. It's definitely a treat for players who are really invested in the story, and this one has a very tight plot, story, and pace. The execution of the quest definitely doesn't leave room for boredom unless you never really cared about the Khaenri'ah plotline. If the Requiem of Echoing Depths was to show how the traveler might not be able to agree with the methods of their twin in their attempts of reviving Khaenri'ah, Caribert was there to show the players and the traveler one of the many events that led the twin down to the abyss. There were instances where the sibling was clearly resistant to the abyssal power during this time, but as Dainsleif stated, seeing the tragedy and suffering that Caribert and Clothar still had to go through long after the cataclysm eventually led them down this path. Both Clothar and Caribert were innocent people. They were not villains or anyone particularly evil. Clothar was just some noble guy from Khaenri'ah and Caribert was literally a child. They had nothing to do with starting the cataclysm, yet they're paying a very heavy price for the sins of others. The reason the Abyss Order and the Loom of Fate operation was founded was because Clothar thought that his child, his innocent child, deserves a much better life than the one he got, which is true. Caribert deserved a normal life, which is why he wanted to make something that could be used to weave his own destiny. It was, in Clothar's mind, a rebellion against the unjust gods. All very solid foundations and backstory for the Abyss Order that the traveler needed to understand. And this might be a controversial opinion for some people, or maybe not, but I personally liked that Paimon wasn't in the quest. I liked that Paimon isn't there to repeat everything and spoon-fed all of the important information to the players. It personally makes the traveler feel like a real character, which is really needed in a quest that's solely about them and their twin. It makes the whole thing flow a lot better too. It doesn't take me out of the really emotional scenes. I think in quests with darker tones like Caribert and really most of the Dainsleif quests, having Paimon absent is always gonna be the better choice. Paimon can be around for events, she can be fun and funny sometimes, but if we had her yapping about how hungry and scared she is while this shell of a broken man is trying to save his dying son after losing everything, it would have messed up the tone of the quest entirely. I personally think it would have made the experience a lot less enjoyable. The focus character here is also just the traveler and their sibling and two lore important NPCs. There's no featured 5-star, Dainsleif is there but only at the beginning, so having the focus on the traveler makes the story a lot more tight and enjoyable too, at least for me. This quest though is relatively short for an Archon quest. Like most of the Dainsleif quests are only like around an hour, which can feel too short, especially when they contain so much lore and information. Obviously we don't need a 10-hour Dainsleif quest, but I personally think if we have something more, at least just a bit longer than the average story quest, especially considering that it has this much important lore, it would have made the execution better and makes it less of an info dump. This one is a bit of a surprise to me because I personally really liked it, and this quest is about a an NPC. Like, the past two quests have been about NPCs, but they're working so far. Which shows, if the NPC is there for a reason and to tell a story, like, I guess Hoyo could really use a playable character to be the tragic character that's turned into a hilichurl during childhood and then dies and never living a fulfilled life. So Caribert is there for a reason and he works. It also helps that he was introduced in a previous quest and he's introduced in a way that shows his very tragic origins. So spending more time with him in this case didn't feel like a chore for an NPC that we've never cared about and will probably never see again. In Caribert, it's revealed that the Loom of Fate operation stems from Clothar wanting Caribert to be able to weave his own fate, after essentially being robbed of his own life at 8 years old. And in this quest, we actually got to see how that life could have played out for Caribert had he not been cursed by the gods at such a young age. Okay, so let's actually do a recap of the quest just in case, because despite it being kinda short, there is a lot of lore bomb and stuff happening. It starts with a commission from the guild about a missing person from Vimara village. The commission is issued by a few residents in the village, but strangely enough, no one seems to remember the missing person's name. When they arrive at the village, the traveler tried to find more information on the missing person. The only thing the traveler managed to dig up was that the person was a young man, he was very kind, and was remembered very fondly around the village. He also apparently liked to accompany the elderly and play with the children and orphans in the village. This man is apparently perfect, and the traveler suspects that this person might only exist in the memories of the villagers and that he never really existed. A villager, Atosa, approaches them and takes them to a particular spot that she used to frequent with this mysterious missing person. She claimed that they used to talk there for hours. Atosa would confide in him and they fell in love a little bit. However, she mentions that the time that they would spend talking would always be around dusk. Even though she felt that they've been talking for hours on end, time just didn't seem to move. This is obviously a very vital piece of information. They're then suddenly attacked by a pyro abyss mage, and according to Atosa, the hilichurl activities around the village have been unusually high. And once they head back to the village, we of course are met with Dainsleif. Dainsleif is there investigating the abyss order as usual, and he suspects that they're up to something, again as usual. The traveler then reminds Dainsleif about his promise to talk about the mysterious voice that they heard in the sanctuary from their last meeting. During this time, Dainsleif asks the traveler if they think that their sibling had betrayed them. This of course is a question that cannot be answered by the traveler yet, because at this point there are still too many missing puzzle pieces. Dainsleif then said there's still hope for reconciliation between the traveler and their sibling, unlike him and his own brother. Dainsleif then proceeds to drop a massive lore bomb about Khaenri'ah, as usual. He reveals that the owner of the voice, the sinner, is also known as the visionary, Fedefalnir, who is apparently Dainsleif's older brother. Not only that, but he's also one of the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah. Those 5 sinners are the visionary, Fedefalnir, Rhindaughter, who I think is the sinner that we're all the most familiar with because she's the alchemist Gold, who also created Albedo and the dogs. There's also Surtalogi, the fowl, who is mentioned by Skirk at the end of the Fontaine Archon quest, Raptatir, the wise, who we know nothing about at this point, and lastly, Rarier, who we also know nothing about. There's also something about how they could have stopped the Vinster King from messing with the foundation of the world. Now, I don't know who this Vinster King is. Is he the same as the last king of Khaenri'ah? Let me know. But apparently, those 5 sinners, despite being highly esteemed, couldn't resist the call and temptation of the abyss. They all shared a world-shattering power amongst themselves, and let me remind you that Gold is responsible for these things and quite literally making a playable character, and at one point it's doppelganger. So if the other 4 are just as powerful as her, then we're probably fucked. Dainsleif then explains that when the cataclysm came and Khaenri'ah was falling, none of the 5 sinners came to defend their nation, and that to him is unforgivable, and it's something that he will never ever forget even if his memories are eroding. Dainsleif has been investigating the Loom of Fate operation, which he suspects to be closely related to the ley lines. The next day, Dainsleif is agitated and he feels like a memory of a person he never met suddenly appeared on his mind, and for some reason he recalled that in this very strange memory, he gave that unknown person the eye of the very first field tiller. He concludes that the missing person has to be connected to the Abyss Order, and they might have something to do with all of these strange memories coming up in the village. Dainsleif then brings the traveler to the location where he kept the eye to see if it's still there, and right at the entrance, Dainsleif begins to act strangely again. The traveler and Dainsleif pretty much realize that the whole thing was a trap and that the fake memories are there to reveal the location of the eye. Sensing something is very wrong with the ley lines, Dainsleif tells the traveler to leave and go back to the village where they might actually find the missing person and uncover the mystery behind the fake memories. After the traveler leaves, the Abyss twin actually shows up, and Dainsleif reveals that he knows that it was a trap all along, but he decided to play along because he knew that it was the only way he could confront the Abyss twin. The Abyss twin also chose to confront him alone, as they knew sending an army against Dainsleif would pretty much be a suicide mission for their followers. Which, okay, that's a nice hit at how powerful Dainsleif actually is. The twin then said that if he wants to talk to them, then he'll just have to defeat them first. And then the quest just cuts back to the traveler, which is very upsetting to me. Like, I know why they needed to keep that confrontation off screen, but come on now. I wanted to see more of that. The traveler is now back at the village and they noticed the hilichurls were unusually calm. The traveler could also hear a voice, a calming voice that's talking to these hilichurls, almost as if it's telling them a bedtime story. They asked around again for the missing villager, and to their surprise, this time no one even remembered that they posted a commission for a missing person. The traveler concludes that Atosa's memory is the key, and they also deduce that the missing person in question is none other than Caribert. Caribert also realizes that the traveler had seen him through their twin's memory back in the last quest and was planning to say goodbye to Atosa. Caribert then asked the traveler to follow him into his own consciousness, where he finally started explaining about the Loom of Fate. He explains that despite his father's intention in making him the Loom of Fate, he was merely one of the means used for its construction. The real Caribert had died when he set everything into motion. What's left of him now is a piece of his consciousness in the Loom of Fate itself, which is why he only exists in memories. The Loom of Fate was apparently a device that could create ley lines. In its primitive and incomplete form, it could create and implant fake memories, but at its full potential, it could create its own ley lines and basically change the course of the world. But it would also lose its original ability to create and implant memories. Everything that's been happening in the village was basically Caribert, who was the foundation of the Loom of Fate, thus being able to use the incomplete Loom of Fate itself to give himself chance to live a life that he never got. Which again is extremely tragic, considering his fate in the real world was that he got turned into a hilichurl at 8 years old. Caribert then informs the traveler that the Loom of Fate is now complete, which means that the eye of the first field tiller has fallen into the hands of the Abyss Order. But Caribert also reassured the traveler that Dainsleif is fine despite all that. He got off-screened, fought the Abyss twin, and made it out alive. Caribert then explains that while Dainsleif might have foresaw the trap that has been laid out for him, he failed to realize that his memory of giving the eye to the traveler was implanted by Caribert himself. Therefore, it was fake. Caribert himself doesn't know what the Abyss twin wanted with the Loom of Fate. He only wanted to use the device to give himself a chance at life and to comfort the hilichurls with a bedtime story, the same way his dad comforted him when he regained his consciousness. As Caribert passes on and fades away in peace, the Abyss twin makes an appearance. And this is probably one of the most important moments in the game. This is the first time that the traveler actually gets to have a real conversation with their sibling. The sibling explains that since they don't belong in Caribert's consciousness, they were both intangible, hence they can't even share a hug, which is devastating. The sibling then explained their motivations and why they wanted a war against the divine. They're in a rush to fully unlock the Loom of Fate before the heavenly principal wakes up, because apparently they were asleep this whole time, as proven by their neglect of the Hydro Archon's divine throne being destroyed. The Abyss twin is shown to still have doubts about whether or not they're actually doing the right thing, and how everything has made it difficult for them to even face the traveler. They also talked about the Sea of Flowers, which is something that the twin encountered at the end of their journey in Teyvat, and how the flower that the traveler had wanted to see was in full bloom there. This flower is actually theorized to be the in Teyvat, and as established in the Requiem of Echoing Depths, that flower is the national flower of Khaenri'ah, and it's also without a doubt the flower that Lumion wears. Which is interesting because in this world quest that I can't pronounce, the flower is also said to be something from the twins' homeland. So this particular flower just so happens to end up in Teyvat and in Khaenri'ah of all places. This bit of information is so important because it slowly hints at why the twins are in Teyvat in the first place. We only know that their homeland was destroyed and that they were traveling to different worlds to find find a new home. So I guess when the twin found the Sea of Flowers in Teyvat, they thought that it couldn't be a coincidence, like they said here. Their conversation was cut short by the collapse of Caribert's consciousness, and then the traveler was made aware that they will not even remember this conversation once they wake up. The traveler then wakes up to Paimon, and she tells them that Dainsleif had visited them and that he was injured and didn't seem all that good. This actually kind of annoyed me because I just don't like how Dainsleif basically got off screen and was gone for the rest of the quest. But nonetheless, the villagers can now also remember Caribert, although they all thought that he'd left, and even Atosa thought he dumped her. The traveler then finds a picture of their sibling and Caribert in their pocket, which is just a very nice and heartwarming picture. And I think the sense of longing and calmness that the traveler felt at the end of the quest is just as real. I think it's interesting that a big chunk of this quest takes place in Caribert's consciousness. I think at this point, Caribert actually acted as a link for the traveler and the sibling, a link that transcends space and time, allowing them, and the players really, to understand the situation a lot better without butchering the story or having them confront each other too early. So Caribert was definitely a good plot device and a good NPC. It's made even more tragic because while we as the players can understand and see the true motivations behind the Abyss Twins' actions, the traveler ends up not remembering everything that happened in Caribert's consciousness. They never had the chance to talk to their sibling. They never realized that their own twin never actually betrayed them. But I think the beauty of the quest is that even when the traveler doesn't remember it happening, doesn't mean that it never happened. Because it did happen. All of the emotions that they felt were real. When they woke up, they felt a sense of loss. The traveler's interaction with their sibling is a direct parallel to Caribert's story. It technically didn't happen in real life. It only happened in the consciousness that's planted by Caribert in the villagers' mind through the Loom of Fate. But the emotions and the bond that they felt with him were real. As Atosa would put it, life is made up of a series of memories. So it doesn't really matter whether Caribert was a real person or not. As long as she holds on to their time together in her memories, he'll always be a part of her life. A very nice end to a relatively short but sweet quest. Here's hoping that the one we get next year is at least a little bit longer, but despite all that, I still enjoyed Bedtime Story very, very much. I think one of the best things about the Dainsleif quest is, well, Dainsleif. He's such an enigmatic character and is still definitely one of the most mysterious characters that we have in the game. He's also the only character that breaks the fourth wall. He does the narration in the collected miscellany. The only other person that does this is Alice. Well, you know he doesn't have any malicious intentions towards the traveler and seems to be very cooperative. He's still not what most would say is a trustworthy character or even narrator. He is obviously very biased in his opinion about the Seven, the Abyss Order, and the Sinners. Up until this point, all we know about his main goal is that he just wants to stop the Abyss Order because they're using the power that brought ruin to Khaenri'ah in the first place, and in his eyes, that's very hypocritical, which is probably why he can't side with the Abyss Twin, because they are siding with the power that brought ruin to the nation. In Bedtime Story, Dainsleif reveals that he resents his brother for being one of the 5 sinners and doing nothing to save their nation while it was falling. His brother is also very heavily connected to the Abyss, which probably adds to his already very strong hatred. He also hates the Seven and the Heavenly Principles because, well, they're the ones that actually destroyed Khaenri'ah and cursed all of its citizens, most of which were innocent. So Dainsleif is the only character that isn't on anyone's side except probably what he thinks is just, and he is the type of person that will turn on you if you come in his way. This is pretty much backed up by his line in the Travail trailer, like that thing about how we or the traveler have to defeat him to reweave fate. So I guess the story is building up to a place where we might actually be in conflict with him despite all of the things that we've been through, and how he was always relatively friendly towards the traveler, which is something I like. I think Dainsleif was never supposed to be a companion to the traveler anyway. He himself said that he can only act as an ally to the traveler when the traveler is going against the Abyss Order. Him leaving at the end of every quest and appearing at random times makes sense. He was was always supposed to be shady and not a constant presence in the journey of the traveler. Dainsleif also seems to remember things in bits and pieces. In Caribert, he mentions that despite his eroding memory, he suddenly remembered the Abyss Twin mentioning the Loom of Fate operation during their travels together. He's also still very much aware of stories from the Seven Nations. He knows about Boreas and Dvalion. He has a very accurate suspicion about what really happened with Morax. He also has very mixed feelings about the Adepti and how they were devout followers of Rex Lapis and for signing a contract with him. But he does have a respect towards hard workers like Ganyu despite all of that. Dainsleif also respects Diluc's resolve to protect Mondstadt, but in Diluc's collected miscellany, he does wonder if that conviction would stay the same had he witnessed the fall of Khaenri'ah. Despite everything, Dainsleif is also very adamant that he would not want anything from Khaenri'ah to harm anyone else in Teyvat. His one true goal is to stop the Abyss Order, and as stated in Albedo's collected miscellany, the fact that he's created by Granddaughter, one of the 5 sinners, through the art of Khaenri'ah, Dainsleif is already very wary of him and the possible danger that he might become. Sometime during the fall of Khaenri'ah, the Pari Zurvan also found Dainsleif amidst the chaos and brought him to the Vorukasha Oasis. According to Zurvan, half of his body had become that of a monster and he was holding a ring tightly in his hand. There's still no explanation about that ring though, or maybe I missed it. If I did, please tell me down below in the comments. They then fought against the abyssal monsters that came out of Khaenri'ah together, and shortly after, Dainsleif left with the Abyss Twin. So that's still part of his lore that we don't know, or at least it's something that Dainsleif has not revealed in the main quest. Dainsleif is pretty morally ambiguous too. Like, one of his last orders to the royal guards of Khaenri'ah was to protect their people at all costs. But now, when those same people had been turned into hilichurls, Dainsleif has no other choice but to convince himself that he doesn't see them as humans anymore, because to him they have lost all hope. They cannot be reverted back into the people they once were. The curse cannot be undone. So to Dainsleif, if anyone still saw these hilichurls as the same people of Khaenri'ah, then they would fall down a deep hole of hypocrisy, just like the Abyss Twin. But we know from the Caribert quest that these hilichurls are still people. Caribert himself was able to regain his consciousness as a human, even though he suffered greatly for it. But it does mean that underneath the curse, those poor people still exist. It's understandable why Dainsleif would look at what the Abyss Order is doing as hypocrisy. They're tampering with the power that brought ruins to the very nation they're trying to revive. But if there is a chance of bringing those people back, the very same people who had lost their lives and are now suffering because of the actions of the sages and the 5 sinners, fighting for that chance would mean that it's fighting for justice, right? Wouldn't that be what they call justice? And if the abyssal power can bring down Celestia, the one responsible for the curse and so much suffering, then wouldn't that justify everything that the Abyss Order has been doing? So if Dainsleif is opposed to the actions of the faction that's actively trying to bring down the bad guy, in this case Celestia, that's responsible for the destruction of multiple civilizations, does that make him a bad guy? This clash in moral principles seems to be Dainsleif's main conflict with the Abyss Order and the sibling, and maybe later on, the Traveler. Khaenri'ah is the big mystery. It is the point of origin for the main storyline. It's also the last region in the Travail trailer. The fall of Khaenri'ah set in motion most of the things that's happened in the game, starting with obviously the twins' journey and the Abyss Order, just like we've just discussed. But aside from that, it's the place where Khaenri'ah originated. Granddaughter created Albedo, Durin, and many others using Khaenri'ah. Durin, as most of you might already know, is the dragon in Dragon's Spine. It actually had a gentle heart and even wanted to befriend the people of Mondstadt, but due to the corrupt blood from the abyssal power, Durin caused a lot of destruction instead. Durin is responsible for the death of Rostam, and the death of Rostam is what pushed Rosalind over the edge to become the Crimson Witch of Flames, and later on, Signora, the 8th of the Fatui Harbingers. The death of Rostam also caused the Grand Master at the time, Arundolin, to give up fighting in his grief, and with no one else to defend Mondstadt during this time, this prompted Barbados, who's been asleep for centuries, to wake up and summon the Valen to take down Durin. And during this fight, the Valen got injured and poisoned by some of the abyssal matter, and that's basically the start of the whole Mondstadt Archon quest. Durin's corpse landed in an area that used to be called Vindagnir, but due to this event, it's now called Dragon's Spine. Durin's blood also made the ley lines in the area pretty messed up and caused the frost-bearing tree to revive, even though it's been destroyed long before the fall of Khaenri'ah by Celestia's nail. If you remember the banger of an event that is his shadows amid snowstorms. Fake Albedo also apparently broke out of Durin's stomach and tried to kill the real Albedo. And that's like, what, 2 of Gold's creations that's creating chaos in the nation? In Liyue, the chasm is probably one of the most impacted areas during the Cataclysm. It was the place where monsters poured out, and in response, Morax sent the Millilith to defend and evacuate the miners. The Yaksha Bosacius made his reappearance during this battle after previously disappearing due to his madness from his own karmic depth. This is explored in the interlude quest with Xiao, Ito, Shinobu, and Yelan. Moving on to Inazuma, Raiden Makoto was also one of the casualties of the Cataclysm, and this was the origin of A's grief that would follow her for 500 years, and also the reason A was able to save parts of Makoto's consciousness and moved it underneath the Grand Narukami Shrine, which is basically the origin story of the Sacred Sakura and how it spawned. A later used this to destroy the remaining Abyss monsters in Inazuma. The Cataclysm was also the reason A lost her closest friends, the Oni Mikoshi Chiyo and Kitsune Saigu. Chiyo was pretty much corrupted by the Abyss and raised her sword against A herself, forcing A to slice off Chiyo's horns and her sword arm, and then she pretty much disappeared. This event alone caused the entire Mikoshi clan to fall into ruins, as it's considered an act of betrayal. Kitsune Saigu was tasked to defend Inazuma while A followed Makoto to Khaenri'ah, but when A returned, Saigu had also became a casualty of the Cataclysm. The intense grief that A felt for losing pretty much everyone she ever cared about in the span of a few days left her pretty much scared of loss and the pain of losing someone, and most importantly, she is now terrified of erosion. This desire to escape erosion is also the reason why A created a puppet, ironically enough using Khaenri'ah techniques, and that's how Kunikuzushi was born. He of course later on became the reason Dottore came to Inazuma, also leading him to resent humanity and became the 6th of the Fatui Harbingers. He was also the reason for the fall of the Raiden Gokaden, impacting the lives of multiple other characters such as Kazuha and the Kamisato siblings. Now in Sumeru, the OG Dendro Archon Rukadevata was also a casualty of the Cataclysm, and I think this event also happened alongside the contamination of Ermansel by the Forbidden Knowledge. Kusanali was also born right after Rukadevata's death, and she became the new Dendro Archon, and she was imprisoned from then on pretty much until the Sumeru Archon quest. Other areas impacted in Sumeru are Old Vanarana, which was invaded by ruin machines and rift wolves and basically kicked off the chain of events that we learned in the Aranara quest. There's also a strange entity known as Marana's avatar that's pretty much the manifestation of the Cataclysm and Forbidden Knowledge that's sealed by the Aranara, but then started to basically bleed out into Sumeru, which is what's causing the withering across the land. In the desert, there were also a lot of abyss monsters running around where the Pari found Dainsleif. Fontaine also lost its Archon Egeria during the Cataclysm. That is the 3rd Archon that became a casualty during this time. It was that bad. In Snezhnaya, the Tsaritsa seemed to resent Celestia after the events of the Cataclysm and isolated herself from the rest of the Archons like Venti despite previously having a good relationship with them. She also joined forces with Piero, who's quite literally a royal mage of Khaenri'ah, in order to rebel against Celestia itself, and that's how the Fatui was established. Obviously, a lot happened across Teyvat due to the Cataclysm, but what happened in Khaenri'ah itself? Well, at least what do we know as of now? We know that there was a war or conflict between humans, that being the Khaenri'ahns, and the gods. Obviously, the gods came out as the victors and Khaenri'ah was destroyed and the citizens were cursed as punishment. The ruling dynasty of Khaenri'ah, the Eclipse dynasty, was wiped out. The purebloods cursed with immortality and the rest was turned into monsters. There are some that avoided the curse, such as Kea. We don't know why he's not cursed because his ancestors, Clothar and Caribert, are prime examples of what the curse has done to the people of Khaenri'ah. We know that the last king of Khaenri'ah, King Ermin, tampered with the secrets from beyond the skies, which at this point is probably forbidden knowledge, to enhance machinery and allow them to defy the world's laws. This is also something that Piero is apparently against. In the Mocking Mask artifact, it's mentioned how he had tried to warn Ermin and the sages of Khaenri'ah from tearing away the veil of sin, but he'd failed to do so, and now everyone's dead. The Abyss twin was also somehow adopted as royalty when they arrived in Khaenri'ah 500 years ago, and was believed to be the one who could control the Abyss and thus control everything. We know that during the Cataclysm, Dainsleif was the captain of the Royal Guard, and we know that he also gave out the orders to Halfdan and his troops to protect the people of Khaenri'ah at all costs. But all of them, except for Dainsleif, were transformed into into shadowy husks. The Albrecht clan tried to step in after King Ermin's fall, but they failed to revive Khaenri'ah, and Clothar founded the Abyss Order, and centuries later, Khaenri'ah was left in Mondstadt as Khaenri'ah's last hope. Rhine-daughter somehow survived the cataclysm and was able to escape and created Albedo long after its destruction. Surtalogy is somewhere out there and apparently took in Skirk as one of his students. But even now, 4 years into the game with only 2 nations left before we reach Khaenri'ah, there's still so much that we don't know. What did Khaenri'ah do to basically anger Celestia in such an extreme way? Outside of the tinkering with forbidden knowledge and abyssal power, it's implied that Khaenri'ah might have been arrogant. They were, after all, a nation without gods. Is it just another case of blasphemy? And why do they even have field tillers? Like, they are essentially war machines, so it is implied that Khaenri'ah was never like a peaceful nation that's minding its own business, at least up until this point. Why was the first field tiller sitting in Mondstadt, and why was it facing towards Celestia? In the war between humans and gods, who struck first? Hopefully we'll learn more about Khaenri'ah in the next Dainsleif quest, because the pacing, the darker tone, the compelling characters, and the lore bombs are the bread and butter of these quests. It's what makes them so good. It moves the story forward, and while Genshin can sometimes feel like a Sunday morning cartoon, especially in some of its events, which, don't get me wrong, is welcomed from time to time, quests like the Dainsleif Archon quest always reminded me of a good old JRPG story. It's also very satisfying to uncover the mystery that's been there since the start of the game and is scattered throughout the world, be it in artifacts, weapons, and even random objects that you can interact with on the ground. These quests are what I feel makes the world of Teyvat comes to life the most, because it explores the story's point of origin. It's also one of the very few quests that develops the traveler as a character, which, considering they are the protagonist, is always welcomed. So that's pretty much all I have to say about the Dainsleif quests as of patch 4.8. I've been looking for excuses to talk about Khaenri'ah, and I finally got one. So yeah, thank you for making it this far. I love you for that. You've wasted I don't know how many minutes of your life, so might as well subscribe, and I'll see you again in the next one. Bye!